Stairwell I got high. Clear. Moving. Okay, next shot. Top of the stairs. Gotta get up there quick. Move. Get the door. Get the door.
Ready to die, bitch?
Hi, I'm Joel Persinger. I'm the Gun Guy. Thank you very much for all of your support of GunGuyTV. I'm super duper grateful for you. Don't stop, whatever you do. Hey, I want to remind you that YouTube sometimes is harsh to me and deletes videos like that. So please follow me on X or Rumble. You'll find links in the description. Both X and Rumble are free speech platforms that do not censor me at all. You will find that occasionally I post videos only there that don't end up on YouTube because YouTube would shadow ban them, crush them, or delete them, or just frankly delete my whole channel. So please do follow me on those platforms, and that's where you'll get all of the stuff that I post, where you'll only get some of it on YouTube. All right, having said that, I've got a conversation today with Kostas Moros, from Michelle and Associates. He represents, among other things, the California Rifle and Pistol Association. And if you are on X, you will notice that he is quite active in his, in his posting of stuff. And I follow him, and frankly, I love following him. He's a little snarky, which is pretty cool, but at the same time, he's very informative. He was kind enough to join me today, and we had a nice conversation about not only what's happening in California with the court system for our Second Amendment rights, but also what's happening nationally. So hopefully this will keep you informed. I know it certainly was informative for me. So let's go talk to Kostas. Kostas, thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it. First time on the show, and I hope you'll come back many, many times. I follow you on X. It's not like I'm stalking you, but I do follow you on X, and you post there a lot. And if you're watching this, I urge you to follow Kostas on X because he posts some very interesting things. Mostly about 2A. Every once in a while, like me, goes over in the election area, tries to stay out of it. But right now, it's one of those times, brother. It's one of those times.
Yeah.
Well, listen, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I'm sorry to interrupt. I had to do this mea culpa for my followers. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little more political this season, guys, but unfortunately, the reality is that the election does affect the Second Amendment. So.
Yes, it absolutely does. I've got the same problem. I really do. I guess so. What I'd like you to do, if you wouldn't mind, is kind of give us an update on what's going on in the court system, because to be truthful, I've been working so much. I've been head down teaching and other things. And we've got so much going on post-Bruin that I've lost track of it. So I know you've been involved personally in a few cases, and you probably have your finger on the pulse of what's going on with the rest of it. So can you kind of give gun owners an update as to where we are, maybe in California, but also nationally, where our Second Amendment is concerned? That would be super helpful.
Yeah, sure. So there's a lot going on right now, especially after Bruin. It's been kind of a roller coaster with lots of ups and downs, and it depends, what you want to look at. For example, we've had some very important wins. Our case, Boland v. Bonta, is a good example of that, where even though the case is still proceeding and we're still fighting some of it, we got California to, at least for now, drop the fight on microstamping, which has allowed new handguns to be sold in the states for the first time in a decade. So that's why people are able to buy things like the P365 and the SIG M18 and, the M&P 2.0 and all of that. So that's one case. We've also had to react to California's reprisals after Bruin. For example, as you all are aware, I'm sure, California tried to ban carry effectively everywhere, at every public place, including private businesses, unless they put up a sign saying carry is welcome. We sued and we blocked that law from going into effect, although we'll have to see now how the Ninth Circuit rules now that the state has appealed, and we got a panel that is probably not friendly to us. But regardless of how it goes, we'll continue to fight, and we'll go up to the Supreme Court if we have to. And there's another, in general right now, there's a logjam in the Ninth Circuit on the Duncan case. For those of you who may remember Freedom Week from 2019, that was the case where you could buy magazines with a capacity of over 10 rounds. And that case now has been pending since 2017, but it's now being held up by the en banc court of the Ninth Circuit because Judge Benitez ruled, and now they took the case back. And we have a bunch of cases, including some that aren't ours, like the assault weapons case, Boland itself, and others that are being held up by Duncan. So once the Ninth Circuit rules on that, we'll be able to get a lot of cases moving. And I think I'm rambling a bit too much, but that's the general layout of what's happening in the Ninth Circuit in California right now. And of course, there's the federal, the Supreme Court might be about to hear a big assault weapons case this year, and that's what we're going to push for.
No, I don't think you're rambling at all. It's interesting to me that the Ninth Circuit is able to just hold up cases. Are they doing that arbitrarily, or is that a process issue? What's holding that up for so long if it was settled pretty much by Judge Benitez in 2017, you said?
Well, 2017 was the case when the case started, but yeah, he's ruled on Duncan twice now. He's ruled on Miller twice now. That's magazines and assault weapons, respectively. What's happening right now is that basically other courts, other Ninth Circuit panels, and even some district courts are saying, look, the Ninth Circuit is about to rule on what exactly the Second Amendment protects when it comes to hardware. That's the magazine case, Duncan. And nobody wants to get ahead of that. So that's why Miller stayed. They're basically waiting to see what the en banc, which is a panel of 11 judges of the Ninth Circuit, says about magazines. Of course, we already know what they're going to say because it's the same anti-gun 7-4 panel that decided this before Bruin. So we're pretty confident they're not going to rule for us, and we're going to have to take this to the Supreme Court. But that is why all these cases aren't moving right now. It's because they're waiting on Duncan. That said, there are new cases that have nothing to do with hardware that we are still litigating. Like I said, May v. Bonta, which is the sensitive places case, and we just got a partial win last week in a case called CRPA versus LASD, which challenges a number of aspects of permit issuance, and that one's moving forward as well.
Well, and that brings up some interesting, with regard to California and the whole CCW thing.
Right.
We have 58 counties in the state. Some counties are just issuing and trying to issue, and then some are dragging their feet. LA, I assume San Francisco, maybe Santa Cruz, and like that. And you're going after LA over I assume, and again, I'm just assuming here, so correct me if I'm wrong. They charge a fortune for the stinking permit. They drag it out. They have these weird requirements and that kind of stuff. Do you have a prognosis here as to when we might be able to straighten this up for Californians a little bit, particularly folks in Los Angeles and San Francisco and these recalcitrant counties where they might actually be able to get the permit and exercise their Second Amendment? Are we years out? Are we months out? Where do you think we are with this?
So we're working on that. I will say real quick, San Francisco, shockingly, has actually been pretty good. We stumbled upon a lieutenant there who's in charge of the CCW program that is actually trying to do this in good faith. And right now I'm hearing that people are getting permits in San Francisco in 4 or 5 months, which by national standards is terrible. But by California standards for San Francisco, that's pretty good, So I would say to anyone in San Francisco, as long as you have a clean record, apply to the San Francisco Police Department, jump through their stupid hoops. It's annoying, but just do it, and you will get your permit. And it's not crazy expensive relative to California. It is expensive relative to others. But yes, as you were saying, we have sued Los Angeles for their wait times, the city of Laverne for its fees, because although the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department has 2-year wait times right now, which is ludicrous, their fees are, for California, sadly, not that bad, like $500 total expense, which is crazy anywhere else. But in California, that's not that high. Laverne, by contrast, is charging around $1,000 when you consider the training course and the psych exam and everything they do. So that's why we've sued them on that. So what happened last week was the judge gave us a partial win. She denied other parts of our preliminary injunction, but the silver lining is she basically told us what she wants to see for us to win in a final judgment, which we'll go towards as fast as possible. So we had 2 individual plaintiffs who had applied to the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department and had been waiting almost 2 years to receive a permit. The judge ruled that was under a preliminary injunction analysis unconstitutional. That whatever she didn't decide definitively what constitutes a long wait time, but she said whatever that line is, clearly over 18 months is too long. So we got the relief for them, but for now at least we don't have a general order for LA to speed things up. So that's what we need to work on. The other bit of good news is that she ruled that California cannot block people from other states from at least applying for a California permit, because as of now, if you are not a Californian, you have no right to carry in California, no ability to, because they don't honor any other state's permits, and you also can't apply for a California permit if you're not either a resident here or employed here. So you would just have no way of carrying here. So the judge, for now, didn't rule for us on the reciprocity aspect. She didn't order California to honor other states' permits, but she did rule that California at least has to let people apply for permits. And she gave us 30 days to work out the details with the Department of Justice, because she wasn't going to figure out how this would work. So we still need to iron out, whether that means someone from Arizona can just pick their favorite sheriff and go apply there, if there's going to be some other process. So we'll need to figure that out. But that's good news. It's a recognition that constitutional rights should not end at state borders, and it is a first step towards reciprocity, we think.
So I got a couple of questions with regard to that. First of all, how does that affect some joker like me who has a home in California and a home in Arizona? I'm already a resident of both states, so that's kind of weird. I mean, if I move my chief residence for tax-paying purposes or whatever, or I decide to live in Arizona more than I do in California, does that throw my whole chances of still carrying in California, even though I've been doing it for 30 years in the wind?
Well,
I mean, is that part of the deal here, or how does that work?
So under the laws that existed before our lawsuit went, yeah, if you changed residences and you were determined to be a resident of Arizona and you weren't employed in California, you wouldn't be able to get a permit here anymore. In fact, one of our people who wrote a declaration in support of CRPA for this case was a former deputy district attorney in California for over 20 years, and he retired, moved to Nevada, and even though he had a carry permit here for decades, he had no way to carry, and even though his family's here, so he's constantly still visiting California, he couldn't get a permit. And I think the judge found that persuasive, because she cited that example and said, look, this is a little ridiculous. So that's why I think now the state is going to have to issue permits. So to answer your question, if you move to Arizona, going forward, like I said, we still need to iron out the details, but under this judge's order, California will have to let you apply, and we'll see how that works. But if it ends up being you can apply to any sheriff of your choosing, then that actually works out for you, because a lot of sheriffs, the best example is probably Sheriff Bianco in Riverside. They are issuing pretty quick. I saw somebody post on Reddit that they got a permit from the Riverside County Sheriff's Department issued in 2 weeks, which is almost like a free state. Of course, I don't want to overwhelm Riverside. I don't want everyone in the country applying there, because then the wait time will get longer. But we'll have to see. It's also possible, I'm purely speculating here because I haven't even spoken to them. It's also possible the DOJ lawyers might tell me that DOJ wants to take this in-house, that they don't want to leave it to the sheriffs, and that they'll process non-resident permits. We need to work it out. We don't know what they'll insist upon, but we'll post news about it once we have it.
You kind of hinted that the judge gave you the cliff notes, for lack of a better phrase, for how to win the case and what she wants to see. Can you give us a little bit more window into what exactly her expectations are as the case goes forward, so that we have a solid win?
Sure. So one of the ones, probably the most disappointing aspect of her ruling to me, was that she didn't provide any relief on the high fees issues of Laverne. And she basically said that we hadn't shown to her that our client's conduct comes within the plain text of the Second Amendment. Now, I think that's ridiculous. Obviously, the plain text applies when somebody wants a carry permit and they don't want to pay $1,000 for it. But nevertheless, she thought we weren't clear enough about that, so we can, I think, easily clear that up for her going forward and get that corrected. And she also pointed out, by the way, even in giving us that loss, that the city of Laverne hadn't presented any history of why these fees are okay. They hadn't presented any evidence at all that was relevant to Bruin. So that's a bad sign for Laverne going forward and a good sign for us. Although we didn't get the relief now, we're going to push forward to final judgment. And the reason, some may ask why we aren't appealing this ruling. And what we've learned from the Supreme Court in the last year or two is that they don't want to see preliminary injunctions. They're not going to grant review on a preliminary injunction. So unless the state appeals and forces our hand to respond to them, then we're gonna push forward to a final judgment. That's our current strategy, subject to change, of course, so that if we end up having to appeal this through the Ninth Circuit, the Supreme Court will be more inclined to take the case because it will be after a final judgment. So I know people want relief right now. I understand that, but it would actually be worse if we spent 2 years appealing a preliminary injunction only for the Supreme Court to say, nah, come back to us later when you have a final judgment. So that's why we're taking this route.
Somebody once used the analogy of a baked cake, that it seems like the Supreme Court doesn't want partially baked cakes. They want you to bake the cake the whole way, and then when it gets here, they'll look at it and tell you whether you got the ingredients wrong or whether it tastes like crap. And that seems to make sense to me. Does that kind of seem like that's what they're trying to do? They want the case to be totally settled before they look at it, rather than looking at something that's sort of half-baked?
That's exactly it. I mean, the Supreme Court doesn't like to take cases in general. They take very few of them each year, and they want to basically have nothing be subject to change. So a preliminary injunction by its very nature is very early in a case. There's been no discovery yet. It's just basically who is likely to succeed, not who actually necessarily will succeed. So the Supreme Court has gotten involved in such cases in the past, but they're not eager to. And, we're involved in the Illinois cases on the Illinois assault weapons ban as well. And they denied certiorari in that case. And, but in doing so, Judge Thomas wrote a concurrence where he basically said, look, we're denying this because it's a preliminary injunction, but we are eager, or at least he was eager, to look at a case upon final judgment. And that's where, not to jump to a different topic, but that's where the Maryland assault weapons case now is, and we're hoping they'll grant cert on that.
Yeah, I want to go over to that federal stuff here in just a minute, but just a couple of quick questions. It seems to me, well, while we're on the subject of sheriffs, San Diego takes about a year. I mean, that's crazy. And it doesn't appear that the San Diego Sheriff Martinez, is dragging her feet. It doesn't appear that she's trying to make it hard for people to get permits. I've taught the class for, 20 some odd years, and it seems so much easier for people to get from the standpoint of a process. But it still takes a really long time. To what do you attribute the length of time when it comes to sheriffs that don't seem to be, or maybe you know something I don't seem to be resistant to issuing? What's taking so long, and why?
Right. So we sued Los Angeles. We were debating between them or Alameda because their waits are just beyond preposterous at nearly 2 years. But there are others like San Diego that are around the 1 year mark, and that's not acceptable either. When it comes to the good faith sheriffs, I think what's happening here is just that they don't necessarily, they got a flood of applications after Bruin, because even though San Diego is one of the counties where you could get a permit before Bruin, I'm not sure people realized that. So once the Supreme Court ruling came out, everyone was aware that they could get a permit. So you have this huge influx of applications. And so maybe they are legitimately overwhelmed. However, what I'd say to that is California is free to join the over 27 or 28 states now that don't require a permit, the constitutional carry states. The state is the one that is choosing to require us to get a permit to exercise a constitutional right. Given they're the ones requiring it, I don't want to hear any complaints about lack of staffing, lack of funding. You insist on this, so you pay whatever it costs, hire whoever you need to hire, and get this done within 120 days. Because, by the way, there's a state law saying this has to be done with 120 days. It's just that the Attorney General has no interest in enforcing that law. So even though all these counties and police departments are violating it openly, it's never going to get enforced against them. So that's all we ask, really. We're not asking, for this to overnight become Arizona where you can get a permit in a couple of weeks. But you should have to follow state law, which is 4 months, get it done in that time, and hire whoever you need to hire, spend whatever you need to spend to get that done. Otherwise, the sheriff of San Diego and similar counties should tell the governor and others that they should stop requiring permits if they feel they can't do this because they are interfering with the constitutional right.
Well, actually, I'm hoping one of these days, sometime in my lifetime, which I sincerely doubt because I'm an old man, but I would hope that eventually it would be so much like Arizona that it's just a constitutional carry state, and that's the end of it. And I was telling some students yesterday on the range that while I've been teaching the class for a long time and I enjoy teaching the class, I'm looking forward to the day when I don't have to teach a class because there isn't one. That would be very, very nice. Well, listen, let's look at the national stuff. You mentioned a few things there. What's going on with us nationally? I know, one of the things, I know you represent CRPA a lot. CRPA is no longer just doing stuff in California. They haven't been for a while. They've been helping out all around the country, it seems to me. What's going on nationally with our gun rights? Sometimes in California we can get pretty myopic and just look at what's happening here because it's so restrictive. But I know you have a view into the rest.
So to be clear, our law firm does represent others, like we work in Illinois. That's not really on behalf of CRPA. That's on behalf of Illinois' organization. So I want to distinguish between our law firm and CRPA. That said, CRPA has been an amicus party on a lot of amicus briefs that I've written, that some of my colleagues have written in other places. So, for example, there'll be an assault weapons or magazine case somewhere else, and CRPA will write as an amicus, a friend of the court, to that circuit and say, this is where we stand on this issue. This is what we've faced in California. So they're basically supporting these other lawsuits by arguing to courts on behalf of those parties, or rather in support of those parties. So the latest example of that, and it's not out yet, but I guess a preview of things to come is, I hinted earlier how there's this Maryland assault weapons case going in the Fourth Circuit, and the Fourth Circuit just issued an en banc ruling on a final judgment, not a preliminary injunction, upholding Maryland's assault weapons ban. So, of course, we disagree with that ruling, but the good news is they got it out faster than anyone expected. We were kind of worried these courts were going to drag it out in hopes that Kamala Harris wins and maybe, knock on wood, something happened to Justice Thomas or Justice Alito and they would get, a more favorable court. But the Fourth Circuit, to their credit at least, did get this out quickly. So now the petitioners have filed for review with the Supreme Court on a final judgment case. And we're going to be writing an amicus brief on behalf of CRPA and others, urging the Supreme Court to grant review on this case. And if the Supreme Court agrees and does review this case, that's going to be a very good day, we suspect, for all of us, because it would strike down assault weapons bans nationally. So you wouldn't have to deal with fin grips anymore. You wouldn't have to deal with, fixed mags, all that nonsense we have to worry about here. It probably wouldn't address magazines yet. We'll have to wait for Duncan for that, for the over 10 round magazines, but it would address, the features laws when it comes to rifles in California.
What do you think? I do this to Chuck all the time, and he always looks at me like, why are you asking me such a stupid question? But I'm going to ask it anyway, because I can.
You're the
internet. I want you to put on your psychic future-telling hat. I know you don't have one of those, but if you have one, put it on really quick. Justice Thomas obviously has made it known that he wants to straighten out this mess where the Second Amendment is concerned. He's wanted to do it for a long time. The rest of the court is interesting. I mean, Justice Connie Barrett, sometimes she's one way, sometimes she's another. It's kind of hard to figure out what they want. Do you feel like the rest of the Supreme Court is as interested in pursuing this, or at least moderately interested in pursuing it, or is it pretty much Thomas that's driving it in the hope that maybe some other justices jump on and want to do these cases?
Sure. I think we have a lock on 4 justices. Thomas, Alito, remember I mentioned the Illinois cases earlier. Alito was actually the only one that voted to review them now, even though it was a preliminary injunction. So Alito's on board. Alito wants to review this as well. Justice Gorsuch has always been strong on the Second Amendment. He wanted to strike down the bump stock ban, although it wasn't granted on Second Amendment grounds, but he wanted to strike down the bump stock ban years ago. He had written a concurring opinion there, so that's a good sign. And Justice Kavanaugh, when he was on the D.C. Circuit as a circuit court judge, was a dissenting vote on a ruling upholding D.C. DC's assault weapons ban. So he had wanted to strike down assault weapons ban when he was a circuit court judge. I doubt his opinion has changed, but who knows? But that's why I think we have at least 4. Roberts and Barrett are indeed, ones where in theory they could flip, but Barrett especially, I don't think she's given any indication that she would uphold assault weapons bans, because she's an originalist. She talked about, how we have to hew to these original intentions of the founding generation, and certainly banning the most common rifles in America would not be true to that. But is there some risk, I guess, that we get, for lack of a better term, backstabbed by Roberts and Barrett? I guess it's possible, but at this point, we can't be afraid to push forward, because if we don't, we're going to lose anyway. So it's time to put up or shut up. And if they were to, backstab us, again, for lack of a better term, and rule against us, then that just tells us what we need to know going forward for what we need to do next on the Supreme Court. Yeah.
Kostas, you've been more political lately on X. I know I have been too, outside of the Second Amendment. I think there's a good reason for that, but I'm curious what your opinion is in this regard. It's in my experience, a lot of gun owners just don't vote. I wish they did, but some of them don't. How dangerous is this election where our Second Amendment is concerned if it goes to Harris, for example, as opposed to Trump, or for that matter, the other way around? I mean, which way as gun owners do we want it to go, and how much harm can it do us if it doesn't?
Yeah, so Kamala Harris will appoint judges to the Supreme Court and the lower courts that don't want to back the Bruen ruling, and probably, frankly, don't even believe the Second Amendment protects an individual right and would reverse Heller if they could. So that's what's at stake here, if you're just looking at it from the one issue of the Second Amendment, is that, Donald Trump, and I've been very critical of him. He certainly isn't my ideal candidate, but he showed us when he was president that at least when it comes to judges, he appoints generally good judges. There are some exceptions, but, we've gotten a lot of recent court wins because of people appointed to the courts by Donald Trump, including Bruen, by the way. That was a ruling, and the recent bump stock ruling in Garland v. Cargill. That was because of the Trump judges. So that's what's at stake here. You vote if you care about the Second Amendment. There is only one real choice in this election, and I hope someday that won't be the case anymore. I hope both parties will back the Second Amendment, so we don't have to stress every 4 years about judges and who's going to be appointed. I'd love to live in a country where there's broad consensus on this constitutional right, but for the time being, there is not, and unfortunately, that leaves only one real choice when it comes to this issue. I know people vote on a lot of issues, and I respect that. But if you vote based on the Second Amendment, or if that's one of the categories you care about, then unfortunately there's only one choice in this election.
The American system bounces back and forth a lot, because sometimes we have a president for 4 years, sometimes we have one for 8 years, sometimes we have one for 4 years, but for the last year and a half, they're lame ducks, or we have them for 8 years, kind of the same thing. And it just depends on where Congress goes as well, but it does tend to bounce back and forth a lot. So when I look at a presidential ticket, I look not just at the guy that's running for president, but the person that may follow after them. Let's say, just for the sake of argument, that Trump wins and he becomes president again. Obviously, he can't become president a third time. There's a restriction there, first of all. Secondly, he'd be way too old. Then you got this guy kind of dangling along there, J.D. Vance. What are your thoughts?
J.D. Vance has been pretty, in the Senate at least, has been pretty strong on the Second Amendment. He clearly has grown up around guns. He tells this famous story of his grandma, who, when she passed away, had guns all over the house for self-defense. So he seems strong on the issue. That said, it's very speculative to assume that he would be the nominee. I realize he'd be the vice president, so he'd have a pretty good shot of being the nominee, but there's others as well who would run against him. Presumably Governor DeSantis, who's been very strong on the Second Amendment, and others, Governor Youngkin, perhaps Governor Kemp of Georgia. So all of which, I don't think we really have, when it comes to the current bench of the Republican Party, a true bad option on the Second Amendment, at least as far as appointing judges. If anything, Trump is the shakiest, if we're being honest. He's the one that said some things that, make you question his personal commitment to the Second Amendment. But the reason that I support him over Harris in this race is because it is a binary option and he has the track record of appointing better judges. So,
do you think his embracing Robert, Bobby Kennedy Jr. affects our calculation at all where it comes to the Second Amendment or the First Amendment or any of these things that we're concerned about as gun owners?
No, I think, whenever a politician endorses a former opponent, they're obviously not going to agree with them on anything, especially when it's of different parties. Bobby Kennedy was a Democrat for a long time. I know they've treated him as a leper now, but he was a Democrat for a long time. So I assume that the Second Amendment and many other issues they don't agree on, but they do agree apparently that they don't want Kamala to win. So I think that's what this endorsement comes from. And if I'm being honest, I very, very, very highly doubt that Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Trump have talked about the Second Amendment at all. I don't think it's even come up with them. It's not, at the forefront of their minds right now. Maybe it should be, but my take on Trump is that he doesn't really care about the Second Amendment. It's not a top 10 issue for him. But again, it comes down to the judges he would appoint, and they have been strong on the Second Amendment.
Thank you very much for coming on the show. You're an interesting guy. So I guess I would ask you, because I've had you here for a little while, and I don't want to hold you. I know you got things to do.
Fine.
What other stuff, is there something we haven't talked about? Is there a case we haven't touched on? Is there something coming up in the future that we should talk about that we haven't so far?
Oh man, there's so many things we haven't talked about. It's hard to keep them all straight in my head because we do a lot of different work, and I've given you a sampling of it today. But there's we have our gun show cases that are currently being appealed in the Ninth Circuit. We have our assault weapons case that's being held pending Duncan. We have we have another case concerning the gun recording at dealers. So there's a lot of little things we could talk an hour about, but I think, we've given the general updates here. And, if anyone wants to learn more, I am on Twitter, probably too much. I think Chuck, if you ask him, would be unhappy with it. So I probably should spend a little less time on Twitter, but I am on there a lot. So if you want to keep track of updates, I am a little bit addicted to it. So you'll find me there. Just ignore the political posts if that bothers you until November, when I expect I'll shift back to a Second Amendment only focus.
Well, I won't tell Chuck if you don't. All right, last question. Kamala, I call her Kamala because it means how mean or how bad, but that's just my thing. Kamala has expressed a desire to ban stuff. She almost sounds like Dianne Feinstein. America, turn them all in. I'm going to come get them. What are the odds of her actually being able to do that if she became president?
Pretty high, because right now, well, I should say pretty high if Democrats also win the House and the Senate. Because right now, just today, one senator, I think it was Senator Murphy, was saying, it was Senator Whitehouse, was saying that if Democrats win all three branches, if they win Congress and the Senate and Kamala's president, they will eliminate the filibuster. They said it this morning. So what that means is they can pass anything they want with 50 votes plus one, because there's no filibuster to stop them. So it would be pretty easy under that circumstance to pass an assault weapons ban. Now, that doesn't mean it would be upheld in court. But again, if Kamala's the one appointing judges and God forbid something happened to Justices Thomas or Alito or both, they are in their 70s, it's up in the air. So that's why, this is a very real threat. And when she says these things, we should take her seriously. And we're fortunate that in the 1994 assault weapons ban, they sunsetted after 10 years. That they won't make that mistake again. If they get this and the courts uphold it, it's forever. They're not going to have a 10-year sunset. Only if in the future, I guess, if Republicans took back over, they could repeal it. But barring that, we're stuck with it. So that's what I would tell people, that these aren't just because of the threat of eliminating the filibuster. This is a more real prospect than it's been in a long time.
Kostas, thank you very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I hope you'll come back again. You're a
Absolutely.
Pretty informative guy.
Thanks for having me.
You're also pretty funny on X. I gotta be honest with you.
Again, I probably should focus more on the lawyer side, but yeah, I have.
You're quippy, brother, and I love it. All right, man. You have a wonderful week, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Joel.
Thank you again for watching the whole video. I really do appreciate it. Have a wonderful week, and again, follow me on X and Rumble. If you happen to be in the San Diego area and you would like to take a class with us, the company I own is called Practical Defense Systems. We teach all kinds of stuff, and you will find a link to that in the description. Thank you again. Have a wonderful week, and wherever you go, whatever you do, stay safe.